History with Master Squishies. In today's video, we'll be covering the history of the M10 GMC. We'll be going over who made it, the design, what nations used it, some of the battles it took place in, and how it performs in-game. To start off, the M10 GMC, otherwise known as the 3-inch motor gun carriage M10, or unofficially the M10 Wolverine, not to be confused with the M10 Booker or the M104 Wolverine. It was designed in 1942 by the U.S. Army Ordnance Department and was produced by both Fisher Body, a division of General Motors, and Ford Motor Company, with a total production number of 4,993 M10s from Fisher Body, 1,038 M10A1s from Ford Motor Company, and 375 M10A1s with turrets, and 300 hulls without the turrets from Fisher Body. The M10 GMC was designed as a tank destroyer to become the first standardized, fully tracked, proper tank hunter and to replace the partially successful M3 GMC. The M10 was drawn up to fit the newly formed tank destroyer force with the must-have request of a rotating turret. The design used a modified M4A2 chassis for the initial standardization, but due to fears in the ability to produce the chassis, it was switched to a modified M4A3 chassis, which was designated the M10A1. Both designs were modified to have sloped armor as well. The American tank destroyer doctrine emphasized speed and firepower over armor. With this idea, the M10 was designed with less armor than your standard M4A2 and M4A3. The turret was pentagonal shaped with sloped armor and an open top. One of its main issues early on was the turret couldn't traverse due to the weight of the gun barrel, and at a slope of 4 degrees or more, the turret was completely prevented from traversing. To fix this issue, the Army ordered that the tank grousers and machine guns be stored in the rear of the turret. However, this did not solve the issue, so a triangular, quick-fix turret counterweight made from lead, mild steel, or cast iron were authorized and added by early 1943. Another fix was added by late 1942, which consisted of a second turret lock. Later it was realized that the counterweights were too heavy, thus a new design was made and fitted for the M10. The new counterweights resembled an upside-down duckbill from the side and would change the rear of the turret from an inward slope to a nearly vertical angle. Even with less armor than the M4 Sherman, the M10 did not conform to the ever-changing tank destroyer doctrine. The M10 was to be used to counter German blitzkrieg tactics by waiting in reserve behind the battle line until a massed enemy tank breakthrough was reported. Then the tank destroyers would swiftly move to the site of the enemy tanks and use ambush tactics and aggressive maneuvers to destroy all enemy tanks or force them into a retreat. The tank destroyers were strictly prohibited from charging or chasing the enemy tanks. Instead, the M10 weighed too much and lacked the speed to be used for its intended use. So in reality, it was mainly confined to play the role of indirect and direct fire support, indirect artillery support, fortification assault, and objective defense while attached to an infantry or armored division. The M10 was equipped with a single turret mounted with a 3-inch M7 gun, which was later switched to a 3-inch M5, and a secondary 50 caliber Browning M2BH machine gun. It had a maximum of 57 mm of armor and a minimum of 9.5 mm of armor. It had a crew of 5, a weight of 29.6 tons, a length of 5.97 meters or 19.7 feet without the gun, and 6.83 meters or 22.5 feet with the gun, a width of 3.05 meters or 10 feet, a height of 2.90 meters or 9.6 feet, and a max speed of between 25 and 30 miles per hour on road. Next, we'll move on to its operational history. The M10 was used by the United States, the British, the Free French Army, the Soviet Union, Israel, and Egypt. The M10 debuted on March 23, 1943 during the Battle of El Qatar in the Tunisian Campaign. In the Tunisian campaign, the M10 proved successful against tanks such as the Panzer II, Panzer III, and Panzer IV, but struggled against the heavy Tiger I until it was able to be equipped with high-velocity armor-piercing rounds. During the Battle of El Qatar, The 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M10s and M3 tank destroyers, destroyed 30 German tanks, but at the loss of 7 M10s and 20 M3s. After the North African campaign, the M10s didn't see much anti-tank combat and was restricted to mobile fire support. During the Normandy campaign, the M10s proved ineffective against the thick frontal armor of the newly fielded Panther and Tiger II. This new encounter caused Eisenhower's headquarters to request that all M10 battalions to be converted to the new M36 Jackson as soon as possible. On July 10, 1944, the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion was able to counter a German counterattack led by the Panzer Lehr Division near Le Désir, with engagements taking place at ranges less than 200 meters, and was able to destroy 12 Panthers, 1 Panzer IV, and 1 Sturmgeschütz III. Due to the initial shock of encountering the new tanks, further changes were made to the tank destroyer force. By late September 1944 and by October 1944, the M36 Jackson had replaced the majority of the M10s. In the British Army, 1,648 M10s were sent to the British via the Lend-Lease program and were given the designation of 3-inch SPM M10. 1,017 M10s were upgunned with a 17-pounder gun in May 1944 to April 1945, and this new 17-pounder variant was known as the Achilles. In French use, around 227 M10s were sent via the Lend-Lease program. They first served in Italy, then in France, and finally in Germany. The most noticeable use was in the liberation of Paris in August 1944, when a single M10 in the 2nd Armored Division named Serico was able to disable a Panther. Other than that, the French operated the M10s similarly to the Americans. In the USSR, they received around 52 M10s that were supplied via the Lend-Lease program and were used to form 2 self-propelled artillery regiments. They then served on the 3rd Belarusian Front in 1944. In Israel, the Israelis bought M10s from scrapyards and dumping grounds in 1948 to be repaired. The first batch were in very bad shape, and some years later the guns had completely worn out. So 17-pounder guns and French high-velocity CN 75-50 guns were installed. By 1955, the repaired M10s entered service, and after the 1956 war, they were modified, but there's no reports of modified M10s being used by Israel in combat, and they were withdrawn from service in 1966. In Egypt, they had a small number of former British M10s with the M5 gun and 17-pounder gun. These M10s were used against Israel in 1948, with a few being captured by Israel. The M10 in combat performed well and achieved some impressive scores, but suffered heavily in woodland areas, urban environments, and in the Pacific Theater. Since I can find some of the numbers, I'll share them with you. On average, between 39 tank destroyer battalions, 43 enemy tanks were destroyed, 17 towed guns were destroyed, and 16 pillboxes were destroyed. The Third Army claimed a total of 686 tanks destroyed and 238 SPGs destroyed. The highest scoring tank battalion in the European theater was the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, with a total of 113 Panzers, including 27 Panthers and 18 Tigers, destroyed. Finally, we'll move on to how it performs in War Thunder versus how it performed historically. In War Thunder, the M10 GMC is perfect. The armor is right, with the maximum being 57mm and the minimum being 9.5mm. The main gun is right, with it being a 3-inch M7 gun, and the secondary is also right, with it being a 50 caliber Browning M2 HB machine gun. The speed is within the 25 to 30 mile per hour range, with it being 29.8 miles per hour. All in all, the M10 GMC is really well done, and I can't find any faults with it. If there was a game mode that was historically accurate and you had to face tanks that were used in those years, such as the M10 against the Tiger I, then I would suggest having high velocity armor piercing rounds as an option. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, squish that like button, subscribe, and let me know what you want to hear about next. I'll see you in the next one.